Since the death of Tyre Nichols, there have been renewed calls for change and police reform. If it feels like we've had this conversation before, it's because we have. Back in 2020, there were calls for change, accountability, and reform after the death of George Floyd. And now we're continuing this conversation with police chiefs from here in New Hampshire. Joining me now, Manchester Police Chief Alan Aldenberg, Portsmouth Police Chief Mark Newport, and Hollis Police Chief Joe Hobecki. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for being here this afternoon. We really appreciate your time, and this is such an important conversation to be having right now, top of mind for so many people. All of you have seen the video of Tyre Nichols' arrest. He died 3 days later. I want to ask you what your reaction has been to that when you were watching it and in the days after. Chief Aldenberg, we'll start with you.
That's troublesome. It's beyond comprehension. To me, it's a matter of basic humanity. How five human beings can treat one other human being the way that they did. It has no place in this profession anywhere in the country, and it definitely brings a negative light to our profession, which this police officers in this state work very hard to maintain our strong reputation, our accountability to ourselves and to our police officers and to the community. So it's sad, it's sickening, and I feel for the family.
Chief Newport, what went through your head when you watched that video?
It was just inexcusable. It's almost unbelievable that in this day and age that something like that is still happening. As a representation of law enforcement, that is not how we do our jobs, not what we sign up to do. We're here to help people, and clearly they were not trying to help. Even if it's a person that may be of question, we're here to protect the rights of all people and give everybody the benefit of the doubt and try to assist in helping people the best we can.
Sure, there to protect and serve. And Chief Hobecki, what are your thoughts? What went through your head when you watched that video?
Frankly, I was disgusted. The three of us and a lot of professionals throughout the state have worked incredibly hard, not just since George Floyd, but prior to that, to ensure that we are building a culture of excellence within the New Hampshire law enforcement community. And unfortunately, when we see things like this happen in other parts of the country, it impacts all of us. And so it's incredibly frustrating. It's frustrating for us because we care about the communities we serve. And our intent is to preserve life, not to take life.
Sure.
That's a last resort in policing, is to take another human being's life. It's just not what we do. We serve communities, we serve our residents and our citizens.
You talk about creating a culture. And a lot of people since the death of Tyre Nichols have talked about the culture of policing. How do you curate a culture in your departments where the police are trying to de-escalate situations rather than what we saw on that video with Tyre Nichols? How do we create that de-escalation culture? And Chief Aldenberg, we'll start with you.
You start with strong policies. You live and breathe that culture of integrity and service within your agency. You do relevant evidence-based training, particularly on the lines of de-escalation. I think all of our police departments have made de-escalation a priority in terms of training and equipment that is focused on de-escalation. That's the number one priority, especially for my police department when we go to a call to de-escalate. You go to effective recruitment and retention backgrounds. Are we recruiting and retaining the right people? And when we hire people, if they're not holding the standard, we're holding them accountable. To me, that's where it's a lot to start with, a lot to take in, but that's the struggle and that's the challenge every day for any police department in this country, for any police chief, no matter how big or how small your agency may be.
Yeah, and for you, Chief Newport, creating a culture in your police department, what kind of culture are you trying to create and how do you do that?
Well, the culture we're trying to create represents our community, an open arms community that welcomes all. We want people that want to be a part of our community. I think it's part of the hiring process. You're screening to see what type of person you're getting. We're in a partnership with our community. We want our department to represent our community and work hand in hand with our community so that when something does happen, what I try to relate to the women and men who work in our department is think about you're dealing with a family member, whether it's good or bad, and yourself in their shoes and dealing with the situation, and how would you want to be dealt with. You know, the majority of the times it's something that can be de-escalated. There are times where, you know, there is a threat, but we exhaust all avenues that we can and de-escalate in a situation.
Sure. And Chief Hobecki, what about you? What kind of culture are you trying to create in your department, and how do you create that culture, and how do you train officers to de-escalate situations?
So I think it starts from the top, Monica. You know, as law enforcement leaders, and I can speak for my colleagues here, we cannot allow a toxic culture to exist where this type of behavior is permissible and it's accepted. We just can't do it. If we do, we've failed. We've failed not just our people under our charge, but we've also failed our communities. We fail our profession. In terms of de-escalation, you know, Chief Newport and Chief Aldenberg talked about training, talked about standards, policies, and procedures. Those are all critical components. And it's not just you establish a policy and it's there. It's a constant evolution to provide dynamic, up-to-date best practices for our officers. And a lot of that starts with simple things that agencies can do, such as, you know, modeling their policies and procedures after nationally accepted standards, or pursuing processes like state and national accreditation, police law enforcement accreditation, where you have these independent accrediting bodies come in and look at your policies and procedures to make sure you're conforming with best practice.
Chief Aldenberg, you mentioned accountability, holding officers accountable. You know, in Memphis, 4 of the 5 officers had records of having violations in the past. How do you deal with that? How do you make sure that if an officer is violating a code of conduct, if they're violating professional code, that doesn't become a pattern and it doesn't escalate?
No, and for us at the Manchester Police Department, you know, you do that through personnel early warning systems. You do that through use of force reviews, which we enhanced in 2022, is officers do use of force reports, but now we have an accompanying body camera footage. So I have a training unit that reviews those use of force reports along with the body camera footage, and they do a monthly analysis. And if they see anything that maybe is a training issue or anything that may be of concern, that's brought up to the command staff level, to my level, and we have discussions about it. And a lot of times it's focused on, hey, maybe the officer could have de-escalated it a little bit better. You know, he or she didn't violate a policy, but maybe he or she didn't have to go hands-on right away. You know, maybe there was a de-escalation method. So that's how we do it. We find it to be effective. And I'll back up a little bit. Creating that culture, I'm sure these gentlemen do it. You have those conversations with your officers about these incidents, George Floyd, about Tyre Nichols. You go down to roll call as a leader, and you talk to these young men and women, and to a person, they will all tell you in my police department, and I'm sure these gentlemen, that they're all disgusted by it. They're all saddened by it because it's a reflection on us. And it's unfair. It's unwarranted to this state, to our police officers, but when they go out on the road, they encounter that and they have to deal with it. And they hear it and they have to be professional and work through it, which we do every day.
What did you tell your officers about this?
Back to what I said before. This has no place in our profession. And when every head goes up and down, like, yeah, you're right, boss, it doesn't. And, you know, I'll stand here and sit here and I'd bet my paycheck, I'll bet my year's salary that incident in George Floyd or Tyre Nichols, that will not happen in this state. I can say with utmost confidence that I know that this state does it the right way. Are we perfect? No, but that will not happen here. I'm very confident in saying that.
Chief Newport, how do you hold your officers accountable, and what have you told them about what happened to Tyre Nichols?
So accountability is one, is leading by example and, you know, setting expectations. I think, as Chief Hobecki had stated earlier about accreditation and having top-notch policies and procedures, and I think one of the key pieces of accreditation is, you know, a lot of places can have the right policies, but they're not necessarily following them, and accreditation holds you accountable to make sure you're following your policies, and then that just, you know, everybody falls in line from there. We set high expectations on what we expect our officers to be doing. and I think we are really well at policing our own. I agree with Chief Oldenburg about those incidents that we saw that happened in Memphis. I do not believe would happen here in New Hampshire. I think our training is well above the norm. The standard that's set for training, I think we're over and above that. And even though we have state regulations, at least I can speak for our Portsmouth Police Department, we go over and above the minimum standards in training with de-escalation, response to resistance. And like we've changed the culture. We don't call it use of force. We call it response to resistance. The force continuum, we use force necessary, rather than just a regular use of force. So we put in terminology that sticks out and makes people think.
Just changing language. Changing
language and, changes your mindset.
Sure. Chief Hobecki, how in your department have you talked to officers about what happened to Tyre Nichols? And separately, how do you hold officers accountable when there's an issue?
We have open, honest conversations about policing in the agency I work for. We feel we embrace the culture of training and openness and allowing input and feedback from our officers. So we have these difficult decisions with our staff, very much like Chief Oldenburg and Chief Newport do. I think it's important to have timely conversations and not to make excuses about conduct and behavior that's egregious and violates policies and procedures and statutes and really just human dignity, frankly. In terms of accountability, I refer to policing in Hollis. We practice the 3 A's of policing: accessibility, approachability, and accountability. And those three tie together. If you're accessible, people feel like you're approachable. They'll want to talk to you, tell you their concerns. And if they feel like officers have made mistakes, that they know and feel comfortable that the agency is holding them accountable and that excuses are not being made. And then, of course, transparency. Transparency is critically important for an effectively functioning police agency. You can't hide mistakes from your communities. You just can't do it. Because if you do, it erodes public trust. So we found that to be quite useful and have experienced, in my humble opinion, some level of success with that, and we'll continue to build and improve upon that.
Sure. And body cameras can help with transparency, as we saw. I see two of you wearing them today, Chief Oldenburg and Chief Hobecki. Chief Newport, you said they're coming to your department. Talk to me about the role body cameras have played. Chief Hobecki, when did body cameras become instituted in your department, and what kind of role have they played in that transparency and accountability?
Sure. We were one of the first, I believe, in the state to use body camera technology in 2016. We completed an upgrade in 2021 to include in-car video systems. Succinctly, I'll tell you, Monica, and I said this to you before we started the segment, there's an independent witness on every call with you. And that's really, really important. And like Chief Oldenburg and Chief Newport, I'm sure will agree, they are useful in terms of not just in terms of transparency, but also in evaluating circumstances, identifying training needs, determining when officers do good things and when they do things that need to be corrected. And that's really important.
Sure. Chief Oldenburg, what's been your experience with body cameras in your department? How long have they been instituted there?
2019, we started the program under Chief Capano. Cops don't like change, right? So you bring a body cam in. First is that initial apprehension. We're over that now, and the officers understand the value of them, because not only are we holding ourselves accountable, but we're holding the community accountable. So, should somebody, make a complaint against an officer, right? I can go to a body cam footage, and I can either dispel or I can, prove that there is a legitimate issue. And most importantly, one of the great factor is, Joe mentioned it, is the training, especially with our young officers that are in field training. The field training officer will bring them in and say, hey, sit down and watch your video. Watch what you did, watch what you said. And a lot of times those young men and women go, I said that, or I did that. And you kind of work them through it. So they're a valuable tool. They're here to stay. And, back up a little bit again, where was the duty to intervene? in
Yeah.
Memphis, right? We have a policy on that, and we're nationally accredited agency. It's part of our policies. You know, where was that common sense officer anywhere there at that call saying, hey, whoa, what are we doing? Right? Somebody tapping somebody on the shoulder, somebody getting him medical attention.
Right.
So again, I keep going back to it, but I know that I have officers that, God forbid, that situation be replicated here. Somebody would intervene and put a stop to it, whether it's a patrolman or it's a supervisor. So a lot of things went wrong there
Yeah.
on many, many levels.
Yeah. Chief Newport, when are you expecting to get body cameras in your department? And
We're in the process of now
Okay.
trying to work with our unions. We had initially in 2018 looked at body cams. We actually brought members from our community and for the committee. And after an evaluation at the time that was with the expenses there and some other needs that we needed, they felt that the money could be better allocated for some of the better, more important needs at the time with our department. But now as time has passed, we've got some of those things, so now we're reevaluating it and working for bringing them into the future.
Gotcha. Okay. I do want to ask you, you know, after George Floyd's death in 2020, so many police departments across the country took a hard look at their policies. They instituted reforms. The police departments in this room that you're representing did as well. Memphis did. Memphis brought about change. They brought about some changes in their department, and yet we still see this almost 3 years later. Have those reforms been enough? Does more need to happen to make sure that this doesn't happen anywhere again?
There's always more work to be done, right? And that's the daily challenge. That's our responsibility of chiefs of police to, you know, lean forward as much as we can to make sure that we're identifying needs, we're identifying training needs, we're identifying equipment needs, and hiring the right people. But right now, I have each officer right now gets 40 hours a year of dedicated in-service training. You know, a lot of that came out of the LEAC. But before that, a lot of us were already way ahead of the LEAC recommendations.
Which is 24 hours a year, I believe.
Right, we're up to 40 now. And a lot of it is focused on scenario-based training. You know, not just weapons training, but, you know, less lethal, de-escalation, dealing with those in mental health crisis, dealing with those with autism, things that, you know, when we came on the job, we wouldn't really even think about. You know, a lot of medical training, a lot of things that are designed to de-escalate and keep people alive, and to Joe's point, to preserve life. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
It's a challenge, but we're all up for it.
Yeah. You talk about mental health training. I'd love to talk with you about that as well, because that does play a role. Officers go out to mental health calls. How are officers trained to respond to mental health calls? In the past, we've seen lethal action at times against people in a mental health crisis. What are officers trained to do in your departments? We can start with you, Chief Newport.
So we have brought people in to speak to our officers and offer training on how to deal with people with mental health issues. Yeah, we work hand in hand with our mobile crisis unit in the Seacoast region. And I think it's something, we have a hospital here that has a mental health ward, so we've traditionally been dealing with people with mental health for such a long time that it's just part of our routine and how we deal with our community. That it's just second nature, just as like stopping a motor vehicle. It's a training that we've had from the get-go and continue to enroll on it. We've also had psychologists come, and we will continue to add that, not only for dealing with mental health crisis of officers, but also for our own sake and our own wellness of our officers.
That's a good point that you bring up, is the mental health of officers as well. That's something a lot of people don't think about often, but there are scenes that officers go to that maybe keep them up at night, that can impact them and their mental health. Chief Hobicke, can you talk about that and how your department addresses the mental health of officers?
It's a key focus for our agency, Monica, mental health and wellness, and we kind of take a three-prong approach to it. It's physical health, it's mental health, and then it's spiritual health. And so we created a wellness program at Halls PD where those are the primary areas of focus. And we've expanded our training, and I think that oftentimes feeds into the culture. From my experience, and I know Al and Mark will reaffirm this, if you have an employee who's well, has good level of resiliency, they're physically fit, they're mentally healthy, they're going to be a better performing employee and a better public servant. And they're going to have less instances of discipline and inadequacies in how they're performing their job. But I did want to go back to dealing with calls for mental health. I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention the program within the state, the crisis intervention team training, that's coordinated through, I believe it's the Fire Academy in NAMI, New Hampshire, that many officers have gone through. In Hollis, we made a commitment last year as one of our department goals to make sure that every officer, from myself all the way to the newest officer, completes the 40-hour training. And we accomplished that goal, and that's really important. And I know Chief Newport and Chief Aldenberg have made a commitment to that training as well, because it allows us to more effectively deal with, individuals in mental health crisis. And then, of course, an expansion of mobile crisis response teams. It needs to be funded. It needs to be funded. You can say you have a program, but if it's not funded sufficiently, it will not work. And I know they'll echo that.
That makes sense. And how is that funded? State funding? Is that federal funding?
For the training?
Yes, for the training.
Manchester, we have a great relationship with the Mental Health Center Greater Manchester. So through some of their grants, they've been able to train us on an annual basis at Manchester Police. So I'm up just over 100 officers that are trained in the crisis intervention training. The vast majority of them are the patrol officers that are out dealing with this stuff every day.
Sure.
So yeah, the funding is always a challenge. But I've had that great relationship to offset some of the costs through grants that they get. That's definitely it's a need.
And I'll add, it's hard, right? Because when you take an officer off the street for 40 hours, it's a week, you have to fill that post. And then when you have chronic staffing issues like many of us have had or do have, it creates issues with, having to pay for overtime and force folks in for overtime. And so it's like the cycle that impacts, things like wellness. When you have people working 80, 90 hours a week, that impacts their wellness.
Sure. And then you're trying to implement training on top of that,
Right.
like you were saying, and that does become difficult, I imagine.
Yes.
Yeah. Chief Newport, how do you make sure that your officers, get the training that they need, that they get the mental health help that they need if they do? How do you make sure that happens?
So we have through our training program, we're fortunate that our community has given us the resources and the financing to provide the training that we do to our officers to make sure they, like I said, we go over and above the standards set in the state. We provide all the training, and over and above the training, our officers are allowed to submit for training outside of what we offer to, whether it's an academy or a private class that's being taught somewhere else at an institution. What was the second question you asked me?
Oh, how do you make sure that I asked you about officers' mental health and their training, and just how you make sure that happens.
And their wellness. Yeah. So on the wellness end, we've recently really started pushing forward on that. We just got approved to get a comfort dog for our own department to work in-house with our own staff and employees. We will bring the dog out in the community as well, but the primary focus of our first dog will be for the own mental health of our officers. We are in the process of working with our unions to put mandatory wellness checks with a psychologist, that they will have to go and speak with a psychologist for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. No impact that comes back on them in the department. It's just someone to go talk to. They can just go and sit there and listen to the psychiatrist, but it's to address wellness, and it's not a taboo because everybody will be going. And this came from our officers from the bottom up to me, and it's something that we're looking forward to implementing in the near future. We're also going to do a department-wide presentation with another psychiatrist that will come in and talk about crisis intervention and just mental wellness for our own well-being and our families.
Sure, sure. And I want to ask all of you, we've gone over so many different topics in your departments. We could talk about this for hours. There's so much that goes into policing. But I want to ask each of you, what keeps you up at night, particularly when you see a video like the traffic stop of Tyre Nichols and what resulted there? Chief Aldenberg, we'll start with you.
What keeps me up at night? A lot. What really keeps me up is, the safety of the community that I'm responsible for, but the health and welfare of my people. It's no secret that this city has had a lot of critical incidents over the years, and so have in their communities. That's what really keeps me up, that I fear that I'm going to get that phone call that, one of my officers says, God forbid, taking his or her life. Because of the stressors of this job. And that's what the community needs to know. This is real. The fallout is real on the men and women of this profession. The things that they see day in and day out, I've been seeing it for 25 years. The same with these gentlemen. I worry, that's what keeps me up. That's why we have peer-to-peer support. That's why we do critical incident debriefs. That's why I have an in-house clinician now at the Manchester Police Department that comes in twice a week and is available. That's why we do what we do, to keep our men and women healthy, not physically and mentally. But that's my biggest fear. That, and one of them has been killed in the line of duty. That's what keeps me up.
Chief Newport, what keeps you up at night?
I'd have to reiterate what Chief Aldenberg said, is just the wellness and safety of our officers on our department. We're fortunate that we don't see a lot of violent crime in Portsmouth, but that call in the middle of the night that something's happened to one of our officers, or even in our community, because we don't see a lot of shootings or violent crimes that occur in Portsmouth, which is very fortunate, and that's not the norm. And it could be a matter of time before something like that happens, and getting that call is what would keep me up at night.
And Chief Hobicki, what about you? What keeps you up at night?
I'll echo what my colleagues here have said. I think policing in any community is inherently different. And although, I work in a small community, and Mark's kind of in a medium-sized to large, and Chief Aldenberg is in a large city, policing's all the same. It's just the frequency of the occurrences. And so safety of officers is obviously primary concern. Another concern, and I know I speak for them too, is, am I being a good leader? Am I doing everything in my power to make sure that the men and women that I'm charged to lead receive every skill and tool that they need to be effective in their job, so we don't see incidents like what happened in Memphis, in Hollis, in Manchester, and Portsmouth. That's our obligation, and we need to be mindful of that. We need to be mindful that we cannot allow cultures, toxic cultures, to exist in our organizations that, in a way, condone this type of behavior, because it's inexcusable, and frankly, it's disgusting. And so those are the things that keep me up.
And is that the key? I mean, we've talked about so many different types of reforms, body cameras, training, but is the key really culture? Create the kind of culture that you create in your department?
Absolutely.
I think so.
Absolutely. It's, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, as a chief, my job is to make sure our department has the resources and the tools necessary to do their jobs and keep them safe, as well as keeping our community safe. So I want to make sure that I've exhausted all avenues to provide our department with everything that they need to make sure that they can do their job safely and keep our community safe.
I want to end with just one last question. There have been reforms in all of your departments in the last few years, changes still being made. What is one key change that you think could still be improved on? Are there any improvements that you think still need to be made in light of what happened in Memphis, or in light of what you see every day in the cities that that you serve?
I would keep going back to training, and having those training dollars available, and having elected officials. I'm fortunate here; they understand the importance of training, and I've been given, proper funding to do that. I keep going back to training. And if we're giving relevant and meaningful and updated training to our police officers, we're only going to get better. You know.
I'd say, you know, other than training, is giving us the ability and the resources to have enough staff. You know, a lot of departments sometimes are fighting to get additional officers, and people, you know, may not say, well, why do you need all those police officers? The reason why we need additional police officers over and above of what we needed to meet our minimum standard is because for the wellness of our officers, they need to have time off. They need to be able to take vacations. They need to be able to get away from the job so they're not doing it 24/7. As Chief said, yeah, we have guys that are working 70, 80 hours a week, and you can't do that over and over and again. And, you know, we're working on now, since COVID hit, you know, 3 years where there's been nonstop, and then staffing issues, and we have minimum staffing levels to make sure that we can properly patrol our communities and keep them safe with minimum resources and staffing. You know, in some instances we have the resources to have the officers, but there's this no one's knocking on our doors signing up, can I come get a job here? It's tough to find police officers. We're all fighting for the same people.
I'm a young police department right now. Put it in
very,
perspective, 75% of my patrol division, right, has less than 5 years on the job. All right.
Wow.
And that's why I keep going back to training for my police department. They're getting a ton of experience, all right, and they're learning quick, and they're doing great things, and they're saving lives, and they're de-escalating, but we're young, and that's why I keep going back to training.
Yeah. Chief Hobicki, what do you think? What's
Great
one
points. I think for me, it all starts with hiring. Show me a bad cop and I'll show you a bad hiring process. Almost every time.
Yep.
And so we need to focus on hiring the right people. And at a time where vacancies are abundant, we cannot, I repeat, we cannot lower standards, because otherwise we're going to keep doing this over and over. When you lower your standards, you permit bad people to get jobs that shouldn't have jobs, and it elevates risk. We're in the job of risk management, really.
I right now have 17 vacancies. This morning I signed 3 rejection letters for people that wanted to work at the Manchester Police Department.
That says a lot about standards.
Right, so that we can't, right? Just to say, oh, I got to get somebody in, just to get somebody in, you're going to pay for that.
Yeah,
maybe a year, maybe 4 years down the road, but you're going to pay a price. I'd be interested to see the backgrounds on those Memphis police officers.
Right. Yeah, as we say, it's not about filling boots. It's
Yeah.
not. It's
Even
about,
if you're desperate to do it.
right.
Right.
And listen, every candidate's different. What I might look for in a candidate in Hollis I can tell you it's going to be different than what Mark and Al look for in candidates they want to hire. Just because policing in Hollis is different, it's inherently different.
Sure.
So you have to find not just the right fit for your agency, but you need to make sure that young man or young woman your agency is the right fit for them. If you can do those two things and maintain your high standards without compromise, you're going to find the right piece.
Chief Joseph Hobicki, Chief Mark Newport, Chief Alan Aldenberg, thank you so much for your time and insight on this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you.